book of Revelation describes the entire New Testament age from the Lord's first advent through his second coming, and it divides it into two separate parts. It's important to understand that it uses symbolism. You can't interpret all the verses literally. If you can find consistency in the symbols all the way throughout, then the interpretation begins to fall into place. And I'm focusing here only on one aspect of Revelation, just for a few minutes. But the breakdown is that this last generation we are living in is the second part of the New Testament age. All the time from the Lord crucified until our generation, that was the first part. Our generation is the second part. I believe that Israel being set up in Palestine in 1948 can be seen as a clear boundary marker between the two halves, although only in a general sense. There's more to it than simply looking at 1948. But as far as the interpretation of the symbolism, I can see at least four distinct figures in the book of Revelation. The first is the seven churches of chapters 2 and 3. These represent the first part of the New Testament age, the time when the Lord was using churches to preach the gospel into the world. The counterpart to the seven churches is the rest of the book, chapters 4 through 22. These represent this last generation in which we live, when all the spiritual knowledge is being revealed, but outside of any organized church assembly. Many evangelicals will tell you that no church is mentioned after chapter 3 because the Christians will have been raptured out at that point, and then the Great Tribulation begins. But that's not it. Following that interpretation is a dead end. I know you hear it everywhere, but please don't believe it. True believers are already coming out of any church. It's not going to be sometime in the future. In Revelation 1:12 through 20, that's referring to the church age. The seven churches are described as seven candlesticks. This is a picture of the candlesticks which were kept in the holy place of the temple. But in this last generation, the second half of the New Testament age, we have access to the Holy of Holies, inside the veil. But we can only enter into the most holy place away from any church assembly. The second symbol is the seven seals of chapters 5 and 6, which represent the church age, and the seven trumpets of chapters 8 through 11, which represent our generation. I believe the fifth trumpet was the time of the Great Tribulation, and it has ended. It's over. We are now in the time of the sixth trumpet. Again, with the dispensationalists, they would have you believe that the Great Tribulation will be a future event, a time of physical suffering. But that's another example of how you can be led astray. That's how important understanding this is. The Great Tribulation was the fifth trumpet. It was a famine of hearing the words of God. This is now the time of the sixth trumpet, when the great multitude which no man could number, of chapter 7, is being saved. And also so much knowledge is being revealed. When the seventh trumpet is blown, I believe that will be when believers are caught up to meet the Lord, and then begins the final judgment day. The third symbol is the 1260 days in the 42 months of chapters 11 through 13. The 1260 days was the church age, and the 42 months represent our generation. The entire New Testament age, therefore, is presented as a spiritual week, divided into two parts, 3.5 years each. But this has to be understood spiritually, not a literal 7 years. For example, chapter 13, verses 5 through 7, the beast whose wound was healed, power was given to him to continue 42 months, to blaspheme God, his name, his tabernacle. Power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. This is describing our time, when Satan is being allowed to rule in the New Testament churches. In the fourth symbol given is the 1,000 years of chapter 20, compared to the 1 hour of chapter 17, verses 12 through 18. This 1 hour, when the 10 horns of the beast receive power as kings, describe Satan being allowed to take over the churches in this last generation. In chapter 17, verse 16, the 10 horns will hate the great whore, Mystery Babylon, and make her desolate. The great whore is the end times church of today, with her free will doctrine, taking in and seducing absolutely anyone and everyone she can. In the 1,000 years of chapter 20, verses 1 through 11, was the church age, when Satan was bound up to deceive the nations no more. But in verse 7, it says he is released from his prison to deceive the nations and to surround the camp of the saints. And that is certainly the situation today. I'm sure you're well aware of that. So, this is a very basic outline. Please take some time and go through all these verses. One way to study the book of Revelation is to read it in light of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. There are other verses too, from, say, Deuteronomy and Joel, Isaiah, Zechariah, probably others. But when you read Ezekiel, it's like the book of Revelation is entirely about Ezekiel. But then it's the same way when you read the book of Daniel also. And then Jeremiah also. It's amazing how the Lord weaves them all together into one revelation. But they were each written leading up to and then during the Babylonian captivity. And that's also what we're living under today. In the name of Yehoshuah, the Lord bless you.